Welcome to today's training session, Reader's Advisory on Uplift and Gentle Reads novels. Before we get started, I want to make sure we give credit to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for providing funding, which pays for today's training. We couldn't do it without them. That's why it's so important to give them credit, as well as encourage you to fill out the survey at the end of today's session, so we get that feedback that lets them know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and gives us a chance to improve on anything that you're finding fault with. Today's topic is uplift and gentle reads. These are two genres or subgenres that are very similar to one another. Imagine that most of you probably have heard the words gentle reads before in terms of certain types of novels. Sometimes we call these softer selections or soft selections. I think that's how we classify them on our genre list for our book discussion kits. But uplift is something that's relatively new, and so I hope that through talking about the two today that you can kind of get an idea of how these might fit in to your discussions that you have with your patrons who might be looking for the type of reading materials that these indicate. My name is Nancy Howes. I'm a librarian here at the Division of Library Services for the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. I'll be your instructor today, and joining me today is Lauren Abner, who's also a librarian. She's the KDLA consultant for technology. And so we're in good shape in terms of having any technical issues or sound issues. Feel free to chat those problems in using your chat box in the lower right-hand corner. And Lauren will get on those so you can get back online with this as quickly as possible. Also, feel free to jump in with any comments or suggestions about authors or titles, because we will be talking about both as we go through today's presentation. You know, despite the season of the year, you know, if you base your disposition on what you hear on the news, you can get depressed pretty fast. You know, when I was thinking about how to introduce my training today, I started flipping back through the last few days of headlines, and you know, I was really depressed by the time I spent about 5 minutes looking. But this is some of the things that is part of our reality today. Unsettling political changes and discord, economic insecurity. You know, the big announcement yesterday about General Motors laying off 15% of its American workforce and closing factories. And a lot of people are going to be out of a job this coming up this Christmas holiday. Terrorism is something that, you know, we've lived with for a while now. Mass shootings. I was thinking this morning about police shooting innocent victims and normal or regular people shooting innocent policemen. You know, social isolation, and maybe this is something more that older people notice, but you know, whenever you go into a doctor's office or you know, restaurant, or maybe you noticed over Thanksgiving dinner how many people weren't talking but were, you know, playing with their phones or texting on their phones. Okay, that's social isolation. That means dealing with the device as opposed to talking to someone face to face. Natural catastrophes, of course, if they're natural, there's not much we can do about it. It's still part of our world. It's still something that we have to deal with. And so if you let all that kind of build in, and it can really make your smile turn upside down. When readers come into the library, they might be looking for something that would provide a release or an escape from what's going on in the real world. So about 2 years ago, on the bestseller list were things like Gone Girl, Girl on the Train. So very much psychological suspense thrillers. Into that mix comes a title, The Trouble with Sheep and Goats. Now, that would not necessarily catch my attention. But this title very soon became a bestseller both in hardback and paperback. So this was a novel that came out in the United Kingdom. It's a novel that tells the story about 10-year-old Tilly and her best friend Grace. And they partner together to uncover the whereabouts of a missing neighbor. It is set in English suburbia in the 1970s. And the story is filled with tenderness and compassion and nostalgia for simpler times. And according to the author, who is also a psychiatrist, she said she wrote the story as an exercise in fulfillment. She wanted to write about communities, about kindness, and people coming together, kind of like a society that we all wish for. And so she wanted to write something like what she hoped would happen in the real world. And then shortly after that, we got this title, which I think you probably have heard of before. Eleanor Oliver is Completely Fine. And this is another title that kind of popped up in the midst of the bestseller list, which was dominated by psychological and suspenseful thrillers. Eleanor is a person who struggles with the appropriate social skills. She's the kind that tends to say exactly what she's thinking without any limits or boundaries. Her life is pretty much prescribed. She avoids social interactions at all costs. But something changes, or everything changes, when Eleanor takes a job and she meets a person named Raymond. He's kind of a bumbling and a deeply unhygienic IT guy from her office. She and Raymond strike up a friendship, and they together reach out to help an elderly gentleman who had fallen on the sidewalk. And so the three together become the kinds of friends who rescue each other from the lives of isolation that they each had been living. And of course, it's that connection that ultimately helps Eleanor find a way to repair her own damaged self. So the writing of Eleanor Oliver is smart, it's warm for the heart, it's uplifting. It's a story out of the ordinary, out of the ordinary person who's kind of weird, kind of, funny without thinking about it, makes for an entertaining journey for the reader, with the theme that the only way to survive is to open your heart to others. And these two titles are pointed out as the start of the creation of uplift genre. This was a term kind of coined by publishers from about 2016 on. The idea that uplift is described as the type of books or a type of genre trend where books have an emphasis on empathy. Books that uplift the spirit, that give you ammunition to sort of redeem yourself or fix what is broken, and often explores themes of family relationships and the human spirit. So the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit of uplift. This is relatively new, so you're not going to find too much about it in your normal kind of genre textbooks, or in the genre helps, like in something like novelist. Uplift, about the only way you can get information on it these days is to Google it and look for specific articles. And uplift, I've seen it written different ways. I've seen it written as two words like it is on the screen now. I've seen it kind of joined together. I've seen it where there's a hyphen between up and lit. So, but it seems the preferred way is to write it as two different words. So as I said, the uplift type of novels focuses on kinder, gentler human connections, but with a sense of still preserving the real world. They don't shy away from dark themes or real life issues. It's just that they're presented with that element of hope that shines through. So these books don't guarantee a happy ending. Instead, they're beautifully told tales of ordinary and extraordinary people living very commonplace lives. It's about what you might call broken people who are looking for redemption or who find redemption and are being helped to fix themselves or to get a second chance of leading a full life. Many of the characters, we might say, are on the outside of mainstream society, like our character Eleanor Oliver. We talked about how she was acutely socially awkward. Other characters seem to have eccentricities that seem to isolate them from the mainstream of society. But instead of seeing these as a disadvantage, these books embrace these differences, these idiosyncrasies, and those that are marginalized or overlooked by society. The idea is that they have the opportunity to fix whatever is broken in their lives, whether we're talking about a single individual or a whole community. So it's the idea that even if your life seems to be fractured because of what's going on politically or economically, you can, you still get this second chance at life. And that idea of redemption or of getting justice resonates with readers. Redemption is often found through unlikely friendships, usually intergenerational connections, or people of different nationalities, those who would seem to have little in common on the surface, but through developing relations find out that they do have common ground. Not only just common ground, but that they can benefit from friendship and love between different or disparate people. These novels come with a strong sense of community. When we look around and we see how life can be fragile and uncertain, we look for something that we can hold on to. And community is one of those things that can kind of overcome isolation and a fragmented life. Makes us feel more secure and more drawn to a sense of purpose and a sense of place. So the main thing, if the main thing you want to associate with uplift is that the genre's trademark is that most people are inherently kind and that there is always hope. So why is uplift popular with fans these days? Well, it kind of goes back to that first slide where we saw the sad world. Turns out that sometimes we read to escape, and people, especially women in particular, are looking to read something that is uplifting and optimistic in times that are difficult. The stories are often entertaining, often are filled with humor. We find them satisfying. That feels the deep human need for justice, for things to be set right in our world. So uplift has the power to remind ourselves of and to celebrate that some of the joys that we can experience are found through our connection with other people. Readers can recognize themselves in the fiction they read. They want to be able to empathize and have an understanding and connect with these characters that they read about. So with all the sadness and turmoil in the world, we want to recall that there's still kindness in the world, even though it might be hard to see at some point if we just watch what's on the news. It focuses on the notion that helping others is satisfying as much as helping ourselves, and that maxim has always been there, that it's better to help others. So it makes us feel good, and it's always been there, but now it's sort of become more fashionable and more believable. So for someone new to this, let's talk about a couple of key titles that you could read yourself to get an idea of the genre, or you could refer readers to. The first one suggested as a key title is How to Stop Time by Matt Haig. If you have any experience with any of these titles, feel free to jump in. How to Stop Time is about Tom Hazard. He's just moved back to London, his old hometown, to settle down and to become a high school history teacher. And on his first day at school, he meets the very captivating French teacher who seems fascinated with him. But Tom has a secret. He has a rare condition where he has been alive for centuries. And Tom has lived history, performing with Shakespeare, exploring the high seas with Captain Cook, sharing cocktails with Fitzgerald. But now he wants to set all that aside and just live an ordinary life. But the problem is that the one rule he has to live by is to never fall in love. So you know what happens in the story, right? He falls in love with the French teacher. And so there we have a love story across the ages and for the ages about a man lost in time, the woman who could save him, and the lifetimes it takes to learn how to live. It's a big-hearted, broadly original story about losing and finding yourself, the inevitability of change, and how with enough time we can find happiness. Another important title is The Summer of Impossible Things by Rowan Coleman. The premise of this story is, if you could change the past, would you? 30 years ago, something terrible happened to the main character, Luna's mother. Something she's only prepared to reveal to Luna after her death. Now, Luna and her sister have a chance to go back to their mother's birthplace and settle her affairs. But of course, the journey isn't an easy one. They end up having more questions than finding answers, until something impossible maybe even magical happens, and Luna gets to go back and meet her mother as a young woman back in the summer of 1977. At first, Luna thinks, that kind of time travel idea is crazy. But then, once she realizes what has happened to her and that she has a chance to change things, she's faced with the question, should she do anything? Would she do everything possible, even if it meant sacrificing her own life? Another key title in Uplit is titled Calling Major Tom. In this story, a 40-something Thomas is very happy to be on his own, far away from other people and all their problems. But beneath his grumpy exterior is really a story that shows a lot of sadness that can be familiar to us all. But along his journey, he encounters a family who will change his view of the world for good. This is heartwarming story, a lot of quirky characters, ultimately a life-affirming story of friendship, family, and forgiveness, and the world's most unlikely astronaut. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Lincoln in the Bardo is another title considered to be uplit. This takes place in February 1862. The Civil War's been going on about a year. Fighting's been going on in earnest, and the nation has come to realize that this isn't going to be a quick and easy struggle. It's a time when President Lincoln's beloved 11-year-old son Willie is sick, lying upstairs in the White House, gravely ill. In a matter of days, Willie dies and is laid to rest in Georgetown Cemetery. Newspapers report that Lincoln is grief-stricken and often returns to the cemetery to sit by his son's side. So it is out of this story that the author George Saunders spins an unforgettable story of family love and loss that breaks free of a realistic historical framework into something with a touch of the supernatural. Willie finds himself in a strange purgatory where ghosts mingle, gripe, and commiserate, fight each other, and enact bizarre acts of penance. And so into this comes Lincoln, and as a struggle erupts over young Willie's soul. So here's an example where, again, we see lots of issues and problems, but with the final message of hope and redemption. So beyond that, we're going to talk about a few key authors. One that I want to bring to your attention is Rachel Joyce. Most of the titles that we had from the last two slides, and as well as the key authors, are mainly British, because I think that's really kind of where this movement started. So Rachel Joyce has a background as a British playwright, and she's known for writing allegorical fiction where she features ordinary people who attempt to come to terms with their past and their unanticipated futures. She uses charming characters who wrestle with failed relationships, lost opportunities, and their inevitable mortality. Her writing has a comic and a melodramatic tone to it, can sometimes be haunting. She provides a strong sense of place, as well as an abundance of quintessentially British eccentricities. That's a mouthful. She offers an optimistic view of the failings of human beings, no matter the age or station in life. You know, her message is you can be ordinary and still attempt something extraordinary. So, in steering readers who might be interested in Uplift, it's suggested that you start with her title, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. Harold Fry, recently retired, sweet, but he's emotionally numb. So he's kind of jolted out of his passive life when he gets a letter from Queenie Hennessy, an old friend who he hasn't heard from in many years. She's written to say that she's in hospice and wants to say goodbye to a friend. So he leaves his tense, bitter wife, and he goes on a quick walk to the corner mailbox to mail his reply to his friend. But instead, he becomes convinced that he must deliver his message in person, and so he starts a journey of 600 miles. Robin Sloan is another key author in the uplift genre. Robin Sloan has a background as a web inventor and a novelist. His titles like to center on books, reading, and technology. He often uses San Francisco as the setting for his stories. They often include people or characters from areas that he's familiar with, web designers, bookstores. He's also known to throw in some intrigue into his stories. So his writing is clever and witty. He offers sharp observations about modern life that always seem to be right on the mark. His writing is considered cheerful, friendly, and very charming. So it's suggested if you want to become familiar with Robin Sloan that you start with his title, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. This story takes place in the Great Recession, and the Great Recession has shuffled the main character, Clay Janin, out of his life as a San Francisco web designer, and has landed him a new job working a night shift at Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. So just after a few days on his new job, Clay begins to realize that this store is even more curious than the name might suggest. There's only a few customers, but they come in repeatedly, and they never seem to actually buy anything. So soon he begins on an investigation or analysis of the customer's behavior and ropes his other friends into helping him figuring out just what is going on at this bookstore. So another key author is Rachel Johns. By trade, she's an English teacher. She's also a mom. And she describes herself as being a chronic arachnophobic, which is fear of spiders, right? Arachnophobia. And rest of the time she uses for writing. She primarily writes women's fiction and rural romance for publishers like Harlequin. It's suggested that in looking at her novels that start with the one called The Greatest Gift. In this one, she returns to a heartwarming story of a woman who wants nothing else than to be a mom and another person who never wanted to be a mother. So we have two characters. We have radio host Harper Drummond, who lives for her career. Every day she meets fascinating people doing extraordinary things, but she's beginning to wonder if there's something out there that she's missing. On the other side, we have Claire, and Jasper Lombard, and they are wanting to have a child, but so far they have not been successful. And so we have these two women in their struggles and talks about having families and what that means for their changes in their lives. So we're dealing with the questions is, can they find someone who will give them the greatest gift, or will it come at a great cost? So again, the idea of people dealing with struggles, but with a message of kindness and hope coming through the writing. So how can we help uplift fans? I'd be surprised if actually someone came up to the desk and said, I want an uplift novel. I think it's so new that most people, wouldn't actually come up. The whole idea of doing reader's advisory at the front desk is to start a conversation with the reader, and you kind of get a sense of what they are wanting to read. Are they looking for something different than what they've read in the past? Are they looking for something that is more optimistic? So I think if you know the genre characteristics of uplit, then you can move readers to those novels or to those uplit authors, even though they may not know exactly what the uplit genre means. So the idea is to insert questions into your reader's advisory interview to see if they're looking for novels that are more optimistic, that show focus on kindness and hope and redemption. For those who are interested in character-driven stories, the ideas where there's a community of characters may be of interest, and also titles in a series. Since this is kind of a relatively new, you might put some effort into promoting this, either with web displays or actual book displays in your library, doing some type of a bestseller list or some type of an informational flyer that you could hand to someone who is looking for a change in this area. On this slide, you'll see a couple of links to online articles that will give you more information, more explanation about uplit and about other authors and titles that are considered to be characteristic of this genre. The top one and bottom one are actually articles from literary blogs or websites. The link in the middle is a list of uplit books in Goodreads. So the second half of our training today, we're going to talk about gentle reads, which really is about the same idea of triumphing in a life through kindness and compassion for others. So very similar to uplit, the difference between the two is not very clear. I think they pretty much essentially are the same thing, except that uplit, I think, is coming out of a British tradition and is gradually making its way across the ocean to the United States. And uplit seems to have certain characteristics that don't necessarily include elements of other genres, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So let's move on. We're going to cover kind of the same outline of coverage for this gentle reads as we did for uplit. So gentle reads novels are the type that, well, it pretty much in a nutshell means exactly what it says. They're gently themed stories where the protagonists, usually women, experience hardship of some sort but triumph with positive outlook, kindness, strength, love, and compassion. Usually gentle reads is kind of considered as a subgenre of some of the larger genres like classics, mysteries. So when we think about the characteristics, we kind of think about those other characteristics of from that crossover into some of the other genres. For example, historical gentle read novels idealize the past, and regardless of what time period is being talked about, you know, the city is sort of out and small town life is in. These novels usually feature a happy ending, or at least one that's kind of bittersweet. Romance can play a part in the story, but it's not a very explicit type of romance. Nothing in gentle reads is explicit. No sex, no bad language, no violence. Even in gentle read mysteries, the crime is bloodless and there's little suspense. This is about a clever detective, often an amateur, pondering to discover and unveil who the perpetrator is. Classic gentle reads are timeless. Their protagonists have a universal appeal that renders them continually relevant and endearing, so that these stories remain in print regardless of how times change. While originally penned for adults, classic gentle reads are often marketed to young adults and children, since their content renders them safe, for younger readers. Women's lives and relationships make up a significant portion of the titles in gentle read genre. They rely on culture-centric settings and a strong characterization. They usually are folks who are folksy or eccentric. They often have secondary characters that remain throughout the series. In small towns, women who have faced various hardships come into their own, gaining independence and often finding love. They encounter difficulties, but instead of foundering, they find reserves of inner strength and support in the form of caring friends and family. So why are these popular? Well, it kind of goes back to the idea that modern life can be unpleasant. It can be filled with discourtesy, stress. We often see violence from a variety of different angles. And gentle reads offers a welcome refuge from the real world. Gentle reads harken back to simpler, slower, milder times that showcase compassion and kindness, and people love them for that reason. They help us decompress. They often make us laugh. They help us find inspiration and warmth in the triumph over adversity, and we enjoy the happily ever after themes, as well as seeing the characters personally grow. They're often written with a great deal of humor that appeals to us. Gentle reads come free of the elements which a lot of Christian readers might find objectionable. Inspirational fiction offers heartwarming stories whose characters rely on their faith in God to see them through. Gentle reads provides protagonists that readers can relate to as well as admire and see as being upbeat and fun, and so that we root for them we enjoy spending time with them while we're reading about them. Prose can be elegant, but it's never complex. The works are about closure and about satisfactory resolutions. The emphasis is on small towns with a distinct cultural flavor that attract readers with unique atmospheres. The plotting was heavily influenced by the cultural constructs of the setting. In other words, the actions take place are in tune with the time that the story is written about. So we get a true sense of what manners and what life was like in a particular age, like Victorian or Edwardian times. So plots often revolve on a chance meeting and an assembly or a turn of a phrase in a conversation that sparks a life change. There's a lack of gore in gentle read mysteries, cozy mysteries. The crime is almost incidental to the story. The emphasis is more on figuring out what happened and why it happened than how it happened. Again, small town village life is often a plus. Expense is at a minimum, and so really our joy is in following the amateur detective and seeing if we can figure out the puzzle along with them. So some examples of key titles in this area. I know you're going to be familiar with some of these. Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Montgomery. This is a classic. I want to tell you that we have a book discussion kit on this title. But Anne of Green Gables is a carrot-topped orphan who has a certain strength and a creativity that gets her in and out of lots of trouble in the idyllic setting of a village of Avonlea on Prince Edward Island at the turn of the 20th century. And so we can follow her story through the series written there. Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. I'm sure we've all heard of Agatha Christie. There's been a murder at Styles Court. Detective Hercule Poirot comes out of retirement to solve he would want the heiress Emily Inglethorne dead. Plot turns keep Poirot and us guessing as suspicious shifts from one peculiar character to the next in the story. Another example of a key title here is Christie by Catherine Marshall. This is a title of, I think, from the 60s. Yeah, published in 1967. Christie is an example of inspirational fiction that is still popular today. Marshall's story is based on her own mother's life. A young and well-to-do Christie Huddleston gives up her easy life in Asheville, North Carolina to become a teacher in the Appalachian village of Cutter's Gap, Tennessee. And so there we see her life's journey as she deals with the new community and becomes involved in a romantic triangle with the local minister and a physician. Another example of a gentle read is At Home in Mitford. This is a series by Jane Heron. This is a phenomenally popular series. Features an Episcopal priest in a small town in North Carolina, and this is the first title in this series. We follow the town's engaging characters in the stories, which incorporate heartwarming themes of friendship, love, and faith, all served up with gentle humor. Miss Julia Speaks Her Mind. This is the first story in the Miss Julia series by Anne B. Ross. We have a book discussion kit of one of the Amby Ross titles. I'm not sure if it's this one, but this one features Miss Julia, who is a pillar of community in a southeast southern town in Georgia, I believe, when she finds herself widowed. She was married to the town's banker, and shortly after her husband dies, a scandal comes out of her husband's death, which changes her life and starts her on a journey of overcoming this scandal and making new friendships and family relationships work. The other is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society. Is one of that's a little bit newer. This title is set in January 1946. So it's set in London just after the end of the Second World War, and writer Juliet Ashton is looking for a book subject that she can write about. And so she receives a letter that finds a name written in a book, and she follows through with that and corresponds, exchanges letters, and she's drawn into the world of this person and his friends. And of course, it's full of quirky characters and lots of things that leads to a charming tale that's very popular. And we have a book discussion kit on this title at KDLA too. So beyond the authors and titles we've already talked about, some other authors that we include in the Gentle Reads area is Debbie Macomber. Debbie Macomber is a very prolific writer. She's known for contemporary romances. She writes about women's lives, often with inspirational stories, domestic settings, and very sympathetic heroines. Her protagonists are ordinary women who are sometimes caught in difficult situations, but they remain optimistic through every adversity. There are some sexual situations in her books, but they generally take place behind closed doors. Dialogue in these gentle stories keeps the pace moving. Her prose style is uncomplicated, and that allows the reader to appreciate the upbeat, unpretentious tone. So if someone is unfamiliar with Debbie Macomber, it's suggested that you steer them towards the shop on Blossom Street. That's a little yarn store in Seattle. It's owned by Lydia Hoffman, and it represents her dreams of a new life free from cancer. And so it talks about the women who come to take lessons and how they all have struggles that they need to overcome. Another Gentle Reads author is Alexander McCall Smith. He's an author of several distinct series, but every series he writes features richly drawn characters, engaging prose, and vivid settings that's earned him a lot of fans. Characters' thoughts and perspectives are central to his novels. Their whims guide the plot and the pacing. The settings are described in detail with frequent references to art and culture. He pays a lot of attention to word choice and often has a gentle, often warm tone that typifies his mysteries in literary fiction. So someone who you want to introduce Alexander McCall Smith to, it suggests that you start with the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, and it bears repeating that we have a book discussion kit on this title too. The first novel in his #1 Ladies Detective Agency series tells the story of the cunning and enormously engaging Precious Ramatsui, who is drawn to her profession to help people with problems in their lives. So she sets up shop in a small storefront, and soon she's hired to track down a missing husband, uncover a con man, and follow a wayward daughter. But this case that tugs at her heart and lands her in danger is a missing 11-year-old boy who may have been snatched by the witch doctors. Another popular author in this genre is Fanny Flag. And we have several book discussion kits written by Fanny Flag in our KDL collection of kits. Fanny Flag used her antique storytelling voice to submerge readers in the atmosphere of the rural small town, spinning tales that are both heartwarming and heartbreaking. She is known as a keen observer of human nature. She illustrates the vast complexity of humanity in her strong and true-to-life characters. Her stories have a strong sense of place and are often nostalgic, giving them a regional and historical flavor. These factors, along with strong heroines and her humorous storytelling style, have strong appeal to readers. So someone unfamiliar with her should start with fried green tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. So this is an endearing and affecting story about two women, Evelyn, who's in the sad slump of middle age, and gray-headed Mrs. Threadgood, who's telling her life story. Her tale includes two more women, the irrepressible, daredevilish tomboy, Idgie, and her friend Ruth, who back in the 30s ran a little place in Whistle Stop, Alabama, offering good coffee, southern barbecue, and all kinds of love and laughter, even an occasional murder. And as the past unfolds, the present will never be quite the same again. The last one we're going to talk about is Jennifer Chiaverini. She's also known for heartwarming, character-centered, gentle read stories with a focus on the dynamics of small-town life and of intergenerational conflict, as well as including the traditional art of quilting. Her stories are seen as sweetly nostalgic and rich with historic detail. So suggested someone starting with her for the first time is to read The Quilters Apprentice. This is the first story, I think, in the Elm Street Quilters series. And so we have a young woman moving to a community, and she takes a job helping a woman clear out a house for a family estate sale. And the person that Sarah works for is also a master quilter, and so we have a weaving of stories that come through as she works for this woman and as she learns about quilting. So how can you help somebody who needs gentle reads, novels? Again, being familiar with the genre, knowing some key titles and author is helpful. Gentle reads has certainly been around longer than uplift. You can find articles about it in your usual RA tools like Novelist, for example, and Goodreads. In your reader's advisory interviews, draw out what elements are important to the reader. What are they looking for? Are they looking for gentle romance? They're looking for a cozy mystery. They're looking for something that's more Christian fiction or inspirational. Clarify terminology when somebody says, I want a safe novel, or, I want a soft selection. Ask them exactly what that means to them, because sometimes, use of words can get a little confusing. Sometimes you might get a request for help from parents whose teenagers are kind of ready for something a little bit more than what they would find in the young adult section. These would be good titles to suggest to parents to give to their older teens because of the gentle read or the lack of explicit sex language and violence. And because setting is important to so many of these stories, stress if setting is important to your character and pick out a gentle novel that features a place that they are interested in. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, there are trends in all the major genres, what's in, what's out. We talked already about the timeless appeal of these stories because of the situations that they are faced. In gentle novel romance stories, Amish and prairie fiction is still popular. That stories are starting to reach out into other historical periods like the Gilded Age of the 20s, Edwardian period, U.S. Civil War, World War II. In cozy mysteries, we're getting the same interest in Victorian Age, Gilded Age, but starting to spread out more into things like Jazz Age and Great Depression. And of course, whenever any book is made into a movie, that always sparks interest in that type of genre or author. That would be true for both uplit and in gentle reads. And here where you can find more information about gentle reads, there is an article in Novelist, which is part of your KYVL collection of databases, Getting Up to Speed in Gentle Reads, that covers the kind of same pattern that I use today in my training. There is an online kind of a handout sheet on the website called the League of Extraordinary Librarians, called Gentle Reads, that kind of gives you a quick thing that you can skim over. And again, there are a list of popular gentle read books and authors in Goodreads. That brings us to the end of our discussion of genres. We just want to remind you that anytime you have a question, whether it be about Reader's Advisory or anything else going on in your library world or practices, you can give us a call here at KDLA. We're here to help you. You can call the reference desk directly at 502-564-8306. If you're outside Frankfort, we do have a toll-free number you can use. Staff is here to answer the phone and email from 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. If you're planning on coming to Frankfort and visiting us in person, please note that the building is only open 9 to 4. Before we get to our final actions for the day, I want to remind you to check out the training calendar for upcoming trainings. Know that we'll be talking about alternative history as a genre in December. I think there are one or two other genres that are going to be done in December too. Like today's training, our live webinars are recorded and are placed on our website. You will get a follow-up email with your certificate attached for attending today's training. Last thing we'd like you to do is to take a survey about today's training. So on your screen, a box should have popped up that says Take Survey